will be looking at how to create 2 useful reports for lead management. So Rob has a couple reports in mind that he wanted to share, and he's going to be the presenter. So Rob, I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Carnegie. And hello, everybody. I want to say a couple things first. Up again this month for our MasterMine end user webinar. The aim, of course, of this series of webinars, this monthly webinar, really is to give you ideas about better ways of using MasterMine yourself with your goldmine, and to do it in as broad a context as possible. In other words, to apply to as many potential users of goldmine as possible. If you feel that this is particularly useful or particularly not useful, we would love to hear some feedback from you, really feedback in any way on our end user series is helpful because that helps to kind of shape how we do this. Today's webinar, of course, is 2 useful lead management reports, which I came up with 2 that I thought are especially useful. They are mostly ones that I've alluded certainly to this approach to your goldmine data quite a number of times. I would love to hear your own ideas again about how well this might apply to you, or if you've got other ideas about things that I could do that could be more generally interesting. Also, before I get started today, I do want to say thank you to Carnegie for stepping in last month and doing a great webinar on the goldmine taskbar items, the MasterMine taskbar items that really I thought gave a great refresher for people on how to make use of the tools that are built into Excel. Sometimes we really just get into using the pivot tables themselves, or we get using Updater, and we forget about all the other great stuff that's there.
Well, you're welcome.
Shucks. Okay, so I'm going to minimize my question screen, but Carnegie will keep an eye on whether questions or comments come up, and she will interrupt me as appropriate, politely as always, I'm sure. Okay, so let's get on with our agenda for today. So really what I want to do is I'm going to just talk very briefly about some reporting ideas related to in particular to sales management. Again, that's most often the focus of goldmine, but it isn't always what people use goldmine for. And hopefully, if you're not a sales manager or sales management assistant or anybody in the sales department at all, you will find ways to make analogy from what I talk about to how you use goldmine yourself. I will get into two specific reports and really kind of take those all the way from the beginning to the end, and then at the end of our thing today, we will do a free giveaway of a half-hour online support / report writing session that if you are still on the call by the end, you can win that. A $90 value. Okay, so let's talk about the kind of generally ideas about sales management reporting. And I listed a series of, these are really more categories of reports than they are actual reports, that over the years I've encountered with just about every organization that uses goldmine for sales management. Most organizations want these. I would say that only a very few are terribly successful at doing all of these at once and having them available for the users who really need them. So often what I find out, even with people who've been using goldmine for years and years, is they may have a couple of these. They may have worked out a weekly call report, or they may have a monthly forecast, but their weekly call report is really still a product of individual sales reps writing things into an Excel spreadsheet and handing that in to the sales manager once a week, as opposed to using a nice, neat process of, using goldmine well, taking down the notes from the calls or the appointments that they've had into history items, which then just simply magically or through the magic of MasterMine become a weekly call report. If you don't have these kinds of reports already set up to where the people who need these reports just click one button and have the report. In other words, with no other human intervention, with no passing around, with no nagging of into someplace and coordinate with everybody else's. If you don't have it down to a simple push button, then you're not really, I think, taking advantage of some of the best aspects of MasterMine. And we can help you to do that. So, if for some reason that seems to be falling down, or you feel like there's a reason that just simply can't be overcome in your organization, maybe we can figure out some creative ways to actually deal with that, and either through some combination of process on your end and reporting on our side, make that happen for you. The other really key thing that I want to say about this before I report writing session is the following. I want to make this other really key point, and that is, when you make these reports, think of them in roll-up terms. In other words, there is a system-wide or a company-wide or a department-wide view of sales, let's say, since we're talking about sales here. There's a company-wide dashboard, a company-wide forecast, a company-wide cash flow projection, and so on. There is also each individual's part in those. And each individual, who is typically a sales rep, should be able to know what is my part in all of those things, either looking at the company-wide monthly forecast. They should know exactly what their part is, and they should be able to see their own individual part in it and how are they doing at accomplishing that. And if you think about it, any group of people who are setting out to accomplish something, whether it's win a championship in sports or sell something, if they're doing that as a team, then they need both views. They need to understand their own performance, and they need to know the team's performance. And if they lack either one of those, they're kind of lost. And they're not going to contribute what they really could and should contribute. Okay, you probably don't need to be talked in much since you showed up for this webinar. Let's get down to the two useful lead management reports. And these are the two that I'm going to go into. So, and one of the first things I want to say about this is, when I say a report, and I'm talking about MasterMine, typically report is not even necessarily a good way of putting it. I'm talking about an Excel workbook that might have multiple reports within it that all by itself might serve different people different ways and even serve different purposes. So I use report as a shorthand term to really mean a set of worksheets, possibly even a set of workbooks in Excel that can have many different sorts of meanings. That said, usually they're focused around a set of data that gets pulled. So I will be looking at, today I'll be looking at leads. So in Goldmine, when we talk about leads, typically we're talking about account records. Now in the context of your own business or the way that you worked with Goldmine, you may be talking about not all the account records in your database. You could be talking about a certain segment of them. You could be talking about opportunities. You may not consider somebody an actual lead until there's an opportunity created in Goldmine. Many different ways of thinking about this. I'm just going to pick one of them, but I invite you to offer your own opinions, offer your own ideas and questions about this in the question section of the GoToWebinar dialogue. The second sort of, again in quotes, report that I'm going to be looking at deals with lost and unworked leads, and we'll talk about some strategies for identifying those as well. Okay, so with that, let's switch over into some live Goldmine here, there, and dig in. So leads from source to close. So the most what I typically try to do is start with the most general or the easiest or the simplest and build from there. I hope you'll forgive me for choosing the particular route that I do here. Again, I am always open to suggestions about how this might be done better. I'm going to start by just thinking about this Goldmine database as one account record per lead is in here. Now, this is, of course, most of you are going to have a Goldmine database that has had leads entered into it over the years. You may consider a lead not just an account, but an account that has had activity sometime in the recent past, or an account, as I'll get into here in a moment, an account that can be identified within a certain group based on people that you encountered at a certain trade show recently, whether those people were in that, whether you were meeting them for the first time at the trade show or you were encountering them for the 10th time there. You may want to segment those leads according to that recent activity as opposed to when or how they were added to your database. Well, we want to take those things into account as I create this report here. So again, taking the simplest to the more complex, we'll start with just kind of an overview of the records that are in here. Now, this is going to start getting a little bit wonky for those of you who are not yourselves avid report writing people, but I'm not going to be too technical. What I'm really aiming at to do here is to really go through the clicks and drags and drops of creating reports as a way for you to just sort of follow along that, but also give you some ideas about things that you might want to do. Okay, so the create dialog is up here. I just launched it from the MasterMine menu here. Of course, if you go to the MasterMine launch dialog first and then click create, that would have you wind up in the same place. So to start with, the question for doing tracking the leads that are in my database really at the start is, well, what fields do I need to have in order to do that? Now, this is going to be an overview of our leads that we have in the database. The key things that I want to do is I want to be able to break it up by source, and I'm going to demonstrate first filtering by source, and then we'll come back with a second round and talk about other ways of doing that. But so I've got a source field here. I'm going to assume that it's filled in for some and not filled in for others. I've also got the date the record was created in my database. So if I go to the summary tab in Goldmine, I'd be looking at this creation date. In other words, when was this lead added to my database? Remember, again, there are so many different dates within Goldmine. Any one of them could be used as the source for doing this. In fact, I'm going to take the last update date as a second example for organizing these as opposed to the creation date. And if you think about it, there are well, infinite ways of breaking this down. The important thing is to think about what in the moment is the most important to you, and then go backwards from there to, well, which fields am I going to pull? So I've got, by default, I do have the source field in here. I've got the create on field in here. I've got, as usual, the fields in here, like the lead scoring built in. I've got which rep is the lead assigned to, and so on. I'm going to go and grab, as I just mentioned, that last update field as well. So that will be a contact to field called, oops, I'm sorry, wait a minute. No, count last modified actually is a contact one field. So that's something to bear in mind. It's going to be C1 account last modified. And I'll also grab the account last user. That's the name right here. So here's the last modified. Here's the last user. Now that, of course, only gets updated in Goldmine when somebody actually makes a change in this record. Just clicking on the name doesn't change it, or just clicking on the record rather doesn't change it. Actually changing some data within it updates it. Okay, so with that, I think that's going to give us just sort of a basic thing to start with. I've got some key information. If I need any other fields after I'm already in Goldmine, of course, I've got my add field button inside of Excel that will allow me to come back and pull any other additional fields that I want from here. So that's good enough to go. We don't have to actually, we're not trapped by what we choose right here, very much anyway. So let's just call this lead overview, and let's dive in. So hit the finish button. Of course, it queries our data, brings us over into Excel, and with that, we will have an overview of our Goldmine database. Now, small demo database here again, 376 leads in here. Let's break them out first off by their source on the left-hand side, so we just see where our lead's coming from. and who are they assigned to? That would be the account rep or account manager going across. Okay, everybody on the call probably is pretty familiar with this particular approach to it. Let me just point out, just because we sometimes sort of fail to, when you create a MasterMine report, you may have noticed you would have a lot of fields on the top of the screen. I don't have a lot of fields come in here. Why is that? Because I've got in my preferences, and you can do this too in your own create preferences, under defaults I've got some preferred things here where preferred settings where we hide all the page fields that would normally be set to all at the top, and so on. So I also got it turning off the subtotals for all the fields, which is an option in there. So if you notice that I'm doing this a little bit simpler or easier than you are, you might want to set those preferences on your side to match what I'm doing here. Okay, so here's our leads. Now, some of our sources here are pretty obviously lead sources, and others are kind of other stuff that's just been sort of filled in here. That is, of course, what you will also encounter in your own database, and you'll want to do things to clean up that data, to group them into logical sources, perhaps also to do things like sort them in a different order. So I'll do a little bit of grouping here, again, just to sort of illustrate that. Let's take ones that are legitimate leads, legitimate lead sources: Chicago Tribune, customer referral. Those should be fairly obvious. The ones that are not probably need to be reorganized and cleaned up, or just kind of gotten up because they're sort of meaningless. So if, let's say, all of these are really unknown sources, that's what I'm going to do here, just group them, and I'm going to control-click on any additional ones that appear to be Wilma, OZ, and another blank one. I'm going to take all those and group them. So I've highlighted them by drag selecting and then control-clicking on them. I'll go to my Tools and group them. I could just as easily have right-clicked and hit group, but I like to demonstrate the buttons here. So let's just call those other for the moment. And as to why this did not successfully name them all other, I don't know. Let me try that again. I must have an item in here. Oh, I do. I have an item in here that's called other. That's why it's not doing it. So why don't I actually join other in there with that group? And now I'll call it other. There we go. Okay, so there's a little lesson about a MasterMine feature there. When you group but assign a name that's already in the database, then you can miss out on things. Oh, here's Fred and George, a couple more that should be added to that same group. Easy enough to get those and add them in. All right, so now I've reduced this down to certain lead sources. Okay, so now that what's going to be more interesting is what are we going to do with this as we are tracking this over time. Now, what I wanted to do was sort of indicate a couple of things about this. One would be, suppose what we want to do is create lead tracking reports that that filter on what is in the source field. So I think everybody here probably knows, going back to the create dialog here, you can create, let's say, a forecast sale report, just as an example, a forecast sale report by going pending sale, and I'm not going to hit the finish button here, and then choosing, once you've created the report, choosing a particular source, and that would give you your pending sales for that given, lead source. That all is easy enough to do as long as you have a goldmine field at the contact level that contains the information that you want, for example, sources like this, and that is easy to just sort of select one or the other lead sources. So let's just take as an example here, Chicago Tribune. Those are my leads that I got through the Chicago Tribune, and then I don't actually need to display that down below anymore. I know that those are Chicago Tribune leads, and I can, for example, make a detailed list of those: contact, company, the industry that they're in, the source, and so on. So that's just real straightforward kind of thing. Maybe putting the account manager this way and the score that way makes more sense. I always like to have a table built into my list just to give the user more accessible information. So, and that might be that's my lead overview report for Chicago Tribune leads, and where I can also choose, other sources. Now, what I started to say was I want to contrast this with, well, what if I don't have a real good lead source field that actually does break it up into the segments that I want? What if I really want to know, for example, I want a report that shows, or I want a series of reports, a series of lead tracking reports that are driven by information that's in the history. For example, let me go back to Goldmine here. Just thinking about your own Goldmine database now. Suppose what we wanted to know was there's a certain trade show that we go to every year. It's called XYZ. And the only way that I know, looking at my Goldmine database, that I met up with somebody at XYZ is that XYZ, since I didn't put it in my source field because it wasn't actually a source of the lead, because, I don't know, maybe they're already in my database, I just met up with them. The only way I really know is that somewhere in history, in the notes, I know that my sales reps will have mentioned I met this person at the XYZ show. So I'm taking this one as an example because I actually happen to have some notes in this database in history records that are attached to certain records that have XYZ in the notes field. So now that is actually, it might sound a little bit convoluted, but that is one of the first things we always run into when we're trying to help people with a sort of a raw Goldmine database that they've never used MasterMine on before, in trying to help them make sense of some segment of their data. They come to it with a question like, well, so, we have a very practical concern. Is it worth our money to go to this trade show every year? Or we want to be able to track, over time, all the sales that actually have derived from XYZ show leads. And again, remember, the fact that you met them at the XYZ show isn't the only thing that makes them a lead, or excuse me, that you may not have first met them there, but at least they belong with that group of people that you have met at XYZ. So how do we get those into a form that will allow us to track these leads over time based on the fact that somewhere under history it says XYZ? Well, that's kind of the next step that I want to take here, and the way you do it is basically to create a Goldmine group of everybody that has XYZ someplace in their notes. So how do you do that? Well, there's nothing built into Goldmine that's going to allow you to do that, but there is MasterMine, of course. So let's, I still have my create dialog up here. So what I want to do is I'm going to use MasterMine here as a process, as a way of preparing my Goldmine to build reports upon what I discover here. So that's the way I'm going to approach this here. So I'm going to take my history, and I'm going to assume that in my Goldmine it's going to say XYZ someplace in the notes under calls or appointments, and I'm going to include the CH notes field because that's where we're going to go searching for that value. I'm going to assume that it's somewhere near the beginning of it, so I'll just take one segment of notes. And that's really all I need to do to start to attack this database to build a Goldmine group of the people who have XYZ in their notes. So with that, I'll just use the generic name of the field, and we'll override it. And this will quickly get me into Excel. And now, okay, so this is every history item for every year. Let's go ahead and say, now I could do this in different parts. I could say, people who I met at the XYZ show in 2014, people I met with in 2015, people I met with in 2016. So you could actually group them, subgroup them here. I'm just going to, for simplicity and speed, I'm just going to go for all of them. Now I've got a total of 1,396 completed appointments and calls in my entire database. Again, I could be more specific in my selections here, but for now, what I really want to do is identify the ones that contain XYZ someplace in the notes. So I'm going to actually take the notes, and it's called CH notes, drag them into the row area here, and do a search, use my search tool here to find all the ones that contain XYZ. Now I could, you know, maybe there are multiple ways of having it in there. I could say, well, I want it to be, could be XYZ or ZYAX. Maybe they spell it differently. Maybe it's trade show. Maybe, you know, whatever. You can give different values that you might be looking for in there. You can use and or. In this case, it's or. So any one of these or the others. And let's put them together in a group. So I clicked on OK, and you can see down here it's searching through all of the notes that are on the page there, and it has grouped them together. Okay, we found 10 items in our database that contain somewhere in the notes XYZ, ZYX, or there we go. Loves XYZ, meta XYZ, and so on. Now, if we looked in the actual notes more deeply, we might find others that have, you know, okay, so we actually looked for trade show, so there's one that's got trade show, and so on. Okay, so let's suppose that's going to be the group that we want to track over time. Because remember, what we're aiming for here is just a simple, easy way to create a goldmine group that will allow us to build a whole series of reports that that use those that use that same group. Okay, so I'm now that's, you may also be aware that sometimes it's hard to work with these really wide fields. Another great MasterMine button here is the Optimize Fields column that will wrap those. And really my key thing is to get at these 34 that contain one of those values. Okay, so when I history items. Now, of course, that's not 34 unique leads. As we see in here, we've got 3 of them that are under the Comrade Corp and probably some other dupes since it's not actually technically sorted. But my main thing here is I wanted to build a goldmine group that I'm going to use as the basis for a series of reports. So let's call this my XYZ leads. And so on the MasterMine drill down ribbon, I chose the goldmine group button, and this dialog came up. I'm naming the goldmine group, going to hit OK. And so as it turns out, there are 30 unduplicated members that will be added here. So as we see, there are some duplicates. Some duplicates in the sense of more than one lead, more than one record associated with a particular lead that contain that clue that indicates their XYZ. Now I can go back and I can do, without even relaunching MasterMine here, I can do all those different kinds of reports, but focus them on that one group. So how can I do that? How can I do, for example, a cash flow report, the sales cash flow report based on just the ones that attended that, or just the ones that have that one characteristic, in this case, that have the XYZ in their history. Well, I can do that by saying, well, let's use a template. So I said I want a cash flow report. We don't have one that's actually called cash flow in here, but we do have one that's called, let's see here, sales. Actually, let me do this. I want ones that will include both pending and completed sales. Here we are, sales, all sales, forecast and completed. And again, if you have the kind of organization where there has to be an opportunity for you to consider that to be an actual forecast sale, then you'd want to do this, probably the second report here. So all I did here was I checked on these, and in the search box I put in the word sales, and it narrowed it down to 2 possible templates that might be used. So now if I just hit the finish button, of course, that's all sales in my system. But what I really want to do is build in, right at the query level, a restriction on this where we're going to be looking at the ones where it is XYZ leads. I named them XYZ leads. That other one is just from an earlier report. So these are my XYZ leads, and when I choose the group name here, of course, that becomes part of the name of the Excel workbook that we're going to be generating. Excuse me. And so this is going to create for me a forecast and completed sale report that that only includes the records that are in that group. And it's important to kind of get your mind around the fact that they're being included in the report based on sort of background information. In other words, we're not actually going to have the history record that says XYZ in it in our report, because the contents of our report is just going to be the forecast and completed sale information. but the fact that it was in that XYZ group, based on the fact that they've got somewhere in their record a history item that says XYZ, that's that's what creates the sense of this report. So we'll go ahead and hit the finish button here. And here we have our forecast and successful, our forecast and completed sales for just that group of, and to just be a little bit more clear about that, let me just organize it. So rather, by default, it's showing it by product, but we can do it by the company that's in the group and the the contact and whatever else we want to indicate. I suppose we would probably also indicate what products are they going to buy and so on. So that would be our forecast, our cash flow report. Now this is all sales, both forecast as well as already completed. So we can actually get a total number of what's the value of that XYZ show for us, 306,652, if we assume that we're going to be selling all that we forecast. And again, we could manipulate this a little bit. We could, as it is right now, we're not showing the probable amount, we're showing the actual total amount forecast. If we wanted to drop the probable amount into the data area here, we could see it both ways. So here's for each. Let's narrow this down here. We don't need to see the individual products. So for each company and contact, here's the total amount we think we're going to sell, and then the probable, that is the probability times the dollar amount of the sale, and do those side by side, and of course manipulate this any particular way you might want to. And here's where this kind of gets back to what I was saying about, it's a report in the sense that you might sort of pin it down and say this is the way this one's going to come up again in the future, but we can also make a whole series of views into this data, save them all in the workbook, and while we're calling it a report, it's really several different, or maybe a whole workbook full of possible ways of looking at the same information. So I'm going to pause for just a second here. Carnegie, if there's anything on the questions, you might want to bring that up here before I move on to the next thing.
We had one question, and it's not really for you, but I think everybody just to be aware. I know there's a lot to take in, and this is being recorded, so tomorrow it typically sends automatically 24 hours after the webinar, so you will get a recording of this. So.
Yes, true enough. Okay, so, and I'm not going to go through all of the formatting of this, but I do want to give you a couple of alternative ways of doing these reports. Again, this all has to do with tracking a certain set of leads over a period of time, or over, basically from source to close. So I'm going to clone this report, going up to the MasterMine toolbar again, choosing the clone button so that I can do a different version within the same workbook. And this one I actually want to show as my view of the same information. So right now this is for all of, for all the leads that we got from this particular source, or from, that are related to the XYZ thing. What do we think is our total sales that are going to come from this? Another way of looking at this, or various ways of looking at this, might be to break this down month by month. When do we think these sales are actually going to happen? And maybe giving it to us over for a particular year. So our on date field is not yet grouped. That'll give us an opportunity to talk about grouping dates. So I'm going to simplify the workspace a little bit by just taking out the company and contact temporarily, and I'm going to drag the on date field in here, because what we want to know is month by month for a particular, let's say a particular year, what do we think are the sales that we're going to get from that XYZ source. So I've dragged the on date field into the row area over here. I'm going to undo that and just do it again a little bit more carefully so you can see if I drop it right here, it's going to just disappear. This isn't going to help me any. I need to be hovering over the row area, and you can see from the mouse icon there that if I drop it, it will create a vertical column to the left of my other information of the the products, or sorry, of the on dates. Now, if I go too far up here, if I go off that, there I'd be dropping it in the filter area, and you can see the icon changes accordingly. So just make sure that you're hovering in the right place before you drop it. Then we're going to group this date, again using the MasterMine tool that kind of simplifies this a little bit. We're going to the date range button is the one that we use for date grouping. Although you could just hit the group button, you would actually get the same dialog here. Now I'm going to go ahead and let it group by years and months, which will allow me to select which years I want to look at sales for, or all of them. It will also allow me to lay this out in month columns so that I can see, let's say for the current year, what a cash flow might look like. So I'm grouping it by years and months. I'm going to rename my fields actually on year and on month. You can rename your fields any way you want to just by typing over the name that's on them, and that new name will stick with it. If I drag it up here, it still says on month and so on. So here is a slightly different cash flow view of the same potential sales. So instead of showing the individual companies and contacts, it's by year and broken out by year and by month. The pending first, and then the already completed. And in this case, it's two different views of it here. One is the total amount that we think we might potentially get from it, and then this is the probable amount, which is presumably somewhat less, since on the total amount it's 100% of what you're forecasting for them, and this is biased down by the probability. It always bothers me to see the numbers done in irregular ways, so I like to format them in a somewhat easier way to look, easier way to see them. Again, just using a tool on the MasterMine toolbar under MM Tools, clicked on there. I only had a single one of them selected that worked for the entire field. So to simplify this a little bit, let me just go with, I'm going to just go with the probable amount as the only set of values that we're going to look at, so we don't have to see it both ways all the time. So I'm going to take out what's called the regular amount and just leave the probable amount. And I'm going to break them out going across month by month. Let's do this a little bit more realistically. So let's say that we're really looking at 2016 sales, again, of the XYZ leads. So since it's only 2016, I'll put the year of and filter on it. And I will drop the months in columns going across. Looks like everything for 2016 is still under pending. We don't have any completed sales for that group for the year. That's fine. If we did have some completed ones for the earlier months, as we really should, then we could see those side by side next to each other. In this case, actually, right now we've got all of our pending and then all of our completed, which we don't have any for 2016. Maybe I'll do 2015 just to illustrate what that looks like. So there would be all the pending first and then all the successful, and then each month repeated there. You might want to reverse the two of these just simply so that for any given month you see, presumably if it's a month in the past, it should only say successful. There shouldn't really be any pending ones for the past. In this case, the only pending ones fall in July and December, and then we've got one that says successful for the future, but it really shouldn't be. So a nicely done cash flow report, if you are actually looking at current data, really should show you the current year from January to December, where everything from January to, let's say, July, or everything January through June only says successful. July has maybe both a successful and a pending because it's still July, and then everything in the future is still only under pending. So it would be a kind of a nice, neat image that neatly labels your information and makes a clear picture of where you stand in your sales for the year. And then again here, we're only doing this for a particular source, so we don't really need the north to south dimension here, but we might break it down, let's say, by who's the account manager, who's managing those leads. There's for 2015, there's for 2016, and of course you leave it flexible like this, so your user, let's say your report consumer, your sales manager, your executive, whoever it is, can actually go in here and choose whatever year they want on the fly. They don't need to, okay, that was fine for 2016, give me the 2017 report, and then you wind up building in hours of delay when all they really wanted was to be able to click on a button to get it. Okay, so that is what I really wanted to do there is on the leads from source to close part of it was to give you this example of a report. This is a cash flow report, but again, that whole set of reports that I talked about can be done within MasterMine using the templates or just building it, using your own sense of where things ought to be in your report. And I really wanted to focus on thinking of these as leads that either became leads during a certain time period or became leads because of a certain thing happening that's reflected in, it could be reflected in the source field, or it could actually be reflected in the past history information. The second part of what I wanted to cover today goes back to, and let me just sort of clear these back to our starting point. Goes back to the question of lead management when what you're really trying to do is identify lost and unworked leads. So how do I find in my database the leads that we maybe got last year, leads that we got from a particular trade show, that we got from a certain source, whatever they might be, that have not been worked or that are falling behind, have fallen through the cracks. And there's various, you just have to start with the question of, well, if I were looking at one of those unworked records in Goldmine, how would I know that it hadn't been worked? If I just happened to alight on one record, how would I know that it hadn't been properly worked? Well, maybe it wouldn't have a sales rep assigned to it. Maybe it would be missing a score. If you have lead scoring in your organization and you've said to your sales reps every time you talk to somebody, put in a score. The first time you talk to them, is this an A, B, or a C lead? Then you would know if there is no score in there, hey, that's one that's fallen through the cracks, especially if you can identify who the sales rep is who should have taken it, you'd be able to find it. So now you can do queries and filters inside of Goldmine itself that help you to identify that, or you can do MasterMine reports that are sort of preset or pre-built around known exceptions, known rules that potentially could be where the user could have failed to live up to the rule. A pretty good indication that a lead has fallen through the cracks. So what do we mean by that? Well, sort of an easy thing might be to go back to our lead overview report and say, well, where are the ones where the source field is blank? That's easy enough to identify. Right now those are, I group them in with the others. So what I might want to do is go back and set that to all and instead choose source blank. So we've got, in this case, one lead in this database that has nothing in the source field. Now, that could be that that's had something that was taken out. There are two flavors of blank in MasterMine reports, and that's important to know. One flavor is used to have a value and doesn't have one now, and those you'll find typically at the top of the list. If it's alphabetical, you'll find those in the top of the list. They're actually null in the database. And then the others are not null, but essentially a blank character. And that's the difference between blank and null. SQL database automatically makes that distinction, and so MasterMine just sort of follows suit. So you just need to be aware that both of those are possibilities. So are these leads that fell through the cracks? Well, they are blank in the source field. I don't know if all by itself that tells us that they are that they've been neglected. But what we might do is look for ones where the score is empty. In this case, the score is filled on all of these. So that's not so clearly. Well, I should say clearly. If my rules say that if a score is in there, that means that somebody has worked it, then we're good to go. But what if knowing whether or not they're being worked isn't a function of whether certain fields have been filled in, but rather whether there's history or whether there is a linked attachment or any number of possible other considerations that you have. So the first thing to do, of course, is articulate in English what tells me that a lead has fallen through the cracks, hasn't been followed up on. Maybe it doesn't have a history item within the last X number of months. That's a relatively easy report to build. Back to our create dialog again. And let's go with the template. And now in this case, I'm showing all templates, so I'll do a search here. So last, we've got a whole bunch of templates that use the word last. So last completed activity of any sort, last call. This actually last call and next call actually shows you both. What is the most recent call and what is the next call that's potentially associated with them. There are lots of different ways of assessing your leads using the various templates that just contain the word last in the name. So search through those, try those out, see which ones work for you. You know, that's kind of the best way to go. I'm going to take an example here. Let's go with last completed appointment or call. That's usually one of my favorites. Now we have done, we don't have in the demo database here. The next version, actually, even that report will have some other options within it where you can do things like indicate, well, it has to be a last completed appointment where the result code is a certain code, or you know, you can kind of set your own criteria for these. If you're, you know, until you have that or it's available, we can always build in additional criteria that indicate for you what is a worked lead or not. So I've still got my XYZ grouping turned on here, so I'm going to go back here and turn that off. So if we had just closed the create dialog and just reopen it again, of course we'd have come up in the default place where that group wasn't down there. So chose last completed appointment or call. Again, check on whatever fields are potentially useful here in analyzing these and hit the finish button. We'll go ahead and hit OK. And like that, we have our overview of our entire database by year and month when each of them last had a completed call or appointment. So if what we want to know is where are the leads from a certain source that have not been worked within, well, let's pretend that it's February of 2016 in my demo database here, so you know, haven't been worked in the last 2 months, then we could pretty easily go and say, let's pull our source field so we can identify which source we're most interested in right now. The leads from, I like Chicago Tribune, let's go with that one. Leads from Chicago Tribune that haven't been worked recently. Well, one of them was worked in January, has a completed call. 3 of them have never been contacted at all, and the others sometime farther back in the past. Well, 2014, whatever month it is, I don't really care. I just know that it was back then, so I'll roll those up. Kind of 2015 the same way. So now I've got my focus. I know exactly which ones that I need to work with here. I'm going to turn off the ones that are more recently contacted, the January 2016 ones. So I'll just turn off 2016 for purposes of my report, and then proceed, leaving my filter on there. Take the filters on there. So from there, I can just proceed by listing whatever I want to know in my report. Who is it that hasn't been contacted? Who's the responsible sales rep who really should be contacting them? Maybe organize it by account manager so that I can put that out there and have them go to work on it. And that's my list. They can make their calls from there. They can do their follow-up activities for that matter. We can do that same process that I talked about before of making a group in Goldmine and then track that group over a period of time. So if I'm the sales manager, I might say, okay, I've identified 12 leads that really need to be followed up on, or whatever criteria I use to select them. These are ones that I'm going to now first, like I did before, build a Goldmine group with those, and then do whatever follow-up reports I want so I can track these over time using that group that I would create right here. Okay, so that's mostly what I wanted to say about lost and unworked leads today. I hope that if you found this useful, let us know if you found that it wasn't useful or you're frustrated and didn't see what you wanted to see today. Please send me feedback My feelings won't be hurt. I just want to make sure that this is useful, especially useful for you. We'll go through the rest of our wrap-up. We'll do our drawing of a winner of a free half-hour support. But before we do that, again, I want to give Carnegie a chance to jump in here with any questions or comments we might have gotten.
We have not gotten any questions.
No questions. Wow.
No
well,
questions.
We appear to have a rapt audience. Okay. Well, very good. Let's move on to. Well, actually, we can just summarize. Go back to the drawing. So I'm going to switch Carnegie while you make the selection of our winner. Let me just. Where's my? Here we go. Let me get back to that. Okay. So that's our PowerPoint, and just want to put up the drawing slide here. So this is, of course, for a free half-hour of support. You can use it for report writing, data updating, data analysis, really anything that we do with MasterMine. And to learn more about what you can have done, if you're not the winner today, you can go to our website, mastermind.net, and click under User Support. All right, Carnegie, what do we got?
Our winner today is Michael Matos.
Michael, congratulations. And I think, Carnegie, you will schedule an appointment with Michael.
Yeah, I'll give you a call. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And we're going to let you out a little bit early today, but I will leave up this slide here indicating where you can get further support with MasterMine. Chris or me, either one of us is usually involved in report writing or data manipulation. We have our other contact information right there. Want to thank you all very much for attending with us today, and thank you, Carnegie, for once again for carrying us through.
Well, and thank you for presenting, Rob.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody, for your time. We'll see you next month.
Bye.